Welcome back to Tiff Unraveled. If you're new here, I'm Tiff. Welcome. I'm so happy to have you listen. If I sound a little bit like a Victorian child on a fainting couch, no, you don't. Okay? All right. Quick little life update. Before we get into it, I went and got myself the damn influenza. Okay? Like, why? Why? I work in healthcare. I'm literally the hand hygiene Olympics. Anyway, all right. Honestly, I am a little bit annoyed about it because I do try my absolute best to be careful, especially this time of the year. I'm washing my hands like it's a hobby. I'm masking up when it makes sense to do so. I'm doing all the things, okay? But sometimes, and if you work in healthcare, you'll know what I'm referring to. Occasionally we get some patients who aren't exactly upfront, and they'll hit you with the, "Oh, hey, I know I came here for my knee pain, but before you go, I also want to let you know that I've had chills and body aches and a fever since yesterday." And they'll do that at the end of a whole ass visit. Guys, don't be that person. Because the way my soul leaves my body when someone says that at minute 27 of a 30-minute appointment, babe, you could have led with that. Like we could have opened with that. We'd all be better off for it. Okay. So don't be that person. Okay. If you're sick, your physical can wait a week. Okay. Just don't go. All right. Anyway, I said all that to say this. If I'm a little off kilter, my brain has been super foggy. I just did my flu test yesterday. Don't really have a lot of respiratory symptoms, so I shouldn't sound too terrible. I don't know how I sound on a normal basis, but I shouldn't sound any worse than that. But for me, it's just I've got a really high fever. My brain is not functioning at its highest capacity. I'm really achy. I'm feeling tired, but I'm here. I'm doing my best, and we're still unraveling. That's what we do. And also, I've just been dying to talk about this. So if you're not new here, then you know that this channel, I really try to make sure that it's based in fact, definitely based in compassionate discussions about our criminal justice system and the cases that we follow. But I do want to preface this again. I haven't followed a trial since Karina Cooper. I said it then, I'll say it now. I am not a lawyer. I am no criminal justice expert in any capacity, any way, shape, or form. I am just someone who is deeply passionate about these cases, about these victims, and really just continuing to learn how our justice system works. I'm not the court, okay? I'm not even a legal intern. I'm none of that. I'm just a girl with Wi Fi and a MacBook and a deep need to understand that timeline. Okay. But that's why you guys are here. And I love you so much for being here with me, knowing all of that. But don't quote me in court. Okay. If you want, you can quote me in the comments, though. I'm always up for that. Anyway, so speaking of our justice system, I have to say, this case is literally unfolding in my backyard, right here, Fairfax County, Virginia. And when something like this happens in your own community, it really gives you an opportunity to look at your local criminal justice system a little bit differently, right? Through a different lens, doesn't it? Like, it makes you pay attention to how your community, how your criminal justice system works, how investigations are conducted, how evidence is handled, and how justice is pursued in your own town, in your own community. And that's made this very interesting for me, I must say. So today, I didn't even say this in the beginning. Today, we are focusing on what has been week 1 of the Brendan Banfield double murder trial. One more aside before we dive into it. I want to set a tone here for how we're going to approach this together, okay? Stick with me. I want us to think of ourselves as jurors in this case, right? I don't want us to be the armchair detectives who've already made up our minds. I know you. I know you. No, we're not doing that. Okay. We're going to approach this as jurors who are sitting in that courtroom hearing all of this evidence for the first time. Okay. That's what we're doing. That means we're going to listen objectively to what's being presented. We're going to take notes together on what both sides are saying. We're going to set aside any preconceived notions that we might have heard from headlines and social media. Okay. We're going to hear what the prosecution presents as proof, and we're going to hear what the defense challenges and questions. Okay. And we're not going to rush to judgment. Okay. We're doing jury brain today. Okay. Because that's what real jurors do. And this is why I know so many of us would not make it into a jury pool, because we would show up for jury duty, like right when they're polling the juries, and the judge would be like, have any of you heard about this case? And any of you in my community would be like, oh, yes, judge. And let me tell you, I know you. I know you. That's why we don't sit on the jury in the courtroom. Okay. But today we're sitting on the jury, the public jury, the Tiff Unraveled jury. Okay. But we're going to be open and we're going to listen. We're putting on our critical thinking caps. Okay. We're going to sit, we're going to listen, we're going to evaluate, and we're not going to decide. We've gotten three trial days of this case underway. Maybe you were convinced on day one. Did the prosecution prove its case to you on day one? I don't know. Maybe, but I'm still listening. I'm still waiting. So grab your notepad, okay? Your real one or your metaphorical one, whichever one you're using. Okay. Let's walk through this. Let's walk through week 1 of the Au Pair Affair murder trial right here in Fairfax County, Virginia, together, just like we're in that jury box. Let's unravel. All right, so let me give you the quick background if you're not familiar with this case and you're just tuning in. Brendan Banfield is a 39-year-old former IRS Criminal Investigation Division agent. Okay, he's on trial for the murders of 2 people. This took place on February 24th of 2023. His wife, Christine Banfield, she was 37 years old at the time, and a man named Joseph Ryan, who was 39 years old at the time. Now, the prosecution's theory is that Brendan was having an affair with the family's live-in au pair, a young woman from Brazil. Okay, that's not how you say her name. A young woman from Brazil named Juliana Magalhães. Hence 2/4 referred to as Juliana, because I don't want to butcher this. Anyway, she was 23 years old at the time. According to prosecutors, Brendan and Juliana conspired together to create this very elaborate plot involving a fetish website called FetLife, where they allegedly lured Joseph Ryan to their home to make it look like I don't know how else to say it. YouTube is going to hate me, but honestly, to make it look like a rape fantasy being played out gone wrong. Okay. I'm going to say this very carefully. FetLife existing is not a crime. Alleged manipulation, planning, and violence, that is the crime. So consent matters, context matters, and we're staying factual here. So Brendan Banfield is facing some very serious charges. He's facing 4 counts of aggravated murder, 1 count of using a firearm in the commission of a felony, and 2 counts related to child abuse and cruelty because, get this, his 4-year-old daughter was in the home when all of this occurred. Now, Juliana, the au pair, she was also initially charged with second-degree murder, but in October of 2024, after multiple offers of a plea deal, apparently, she finally agreed and accepted a plea deal, and she's pleading guilty to manslaughter in exchange for her testimony against Brendan Banfield. She is going to get time served. She does understand that she could receive up to 10 years for her part in this crime. And then once she is free, she will go back to Brazil. That's my understanding of it. She may very likely just get time served, which jury brain, this isn't Juliana's trial. Okay. But you guys can let me know what you think down below, because it's very likely that once this trial is over, Juliana may just be sent back to Brazil. And that I, in this episode, have no opinions. Okay. Moving on. So, what this means, though, is that she is the prosecution's star witness this entire case. Okay. And that her role will obviously become very important as we continue through this. Now, this trial is being heard by Judge Penny Azcarate, and if any of you think that that name sounds familiar, that's because it definitely is familiar. She's the same judge who presided over the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial here in Fairfax County. And yes, that's that judge. We love Judge Penny, okay? She is not new to the chaos. She has seen all of the things. She knows how to handle a courtroom in a high pressure, very public situation. So, anyway, with that information, let's jump in to what took place in week 1. So we started the week, well, where every week starts, everybody's favorite day of the week, obviously, Monday. And Monday was all about jury selection. I think that from what I read, the pool started with about 80 potential jurors, and we whittled it down to 16. There were I think 10 men and 6 women, with 4 of them serving. I'm shedding hair, like 10 men, 6 women. 4 of these people serving as alternates. Now, jury selection, I think for a lot of people sounds kind of boring, but it's actually really important because this is where both sides try really hard to figure out who is going to be listening to this case and who can be very fair and very impartial. Impartial is so hard, right? Again, we talked about this. This is why, like, I know I could never sit on a jury. I form and I'm human. It's like if I'm living in this town and I'm hearing about this case and it's a high profile case, like it's not just my town talking about it, it's like national news. There's a chance I've already kind of started forming my own opinions because that's just what I do. I don't, finding an impartial jury is hard. Although to be fair, I feel like the true crime community is a huge community, but I also have to remember that like a lot of people don't pay any attention to this stuff, which is why I have nobody else to talk to about it with other than you guys. Because people in my everyday life, I'm like, did you hear? And they're like, what? And so that's probably where they pulled their jury from, those people. And of course, the judge will start out by asking the basics. She was making sure that any members of the potential jury were able to serve for 4 weeks because this trial apparently is expected to go through the first week of February. She asked what people already knew about the case, whether anyone had any experience with law enforcement or the criminal justice system that might affect their ability to be fair when hearing this trial. And then the prosecution went through their list of 18 witnesses that they planned to call or could potentially call, right? Asking if anyone knew them or was related to them. Most of these witnesses were apparently law enforcement, first responders. And then I think Brendan Banfield's, this is just what I've read. Brendan Banfield's defense attorney asked potential jurors if they or anyone they knew had been involved in an extramarital affair. And I think that, like, at least one person was immediately disqualified based on that question alone. And then a few others who raised their hands were eventually left off of the jury. What a diabolical question, right? You're making people get real honest real fast. But I mean, that's the point here, right? Fairfax County said, me, I'd like to be excused immediately. That's what most people were probably saying when they were sitting on this jury. But anyway, me, I would be the opposite. I'd be like, God, hope they choose me, but they never would because of what I do and all. I guess I've single-handedly eliminated myself from ever being able to sit on a jury on any high-profile case ever. Damn it. Excuse me while I delete my channel. I'll be right back. Anyway, so jury was chosen end of Monday. They were also asked about any biased opinions on like BDSM, because this case has a lot of stuff that a lot of people could could form opinions on very quickly before, hearing evidence. So anyway, at the end of the day, they had their jury of 16, 12 jurors, 4 alternates, and we were actually ready to start the trial on Tuesday, which we did. Now, I want to preface this entire thing by saying I worked all week. Even yesterday, up until the moment on my lunch break when I was diagnosed with flu A, but I damn sure had that AirPod in. Okay, but with that being said, all week long, I was listening. I was scribbling like a mad woman in between patients. I was like, ooh, 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 blah, 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 right? I hope I got it all. If I did not, please don't come for me, guys. This is just a discussion. It's just a conversation. I'm doing my best. Don't come for me. There's so much comprehensive coverage on this trial. In fact, so many of our beloved true crime content creators, our favorites, right? Courtroom Confidential, Gizella K over at Grizzly True Crime, they're streaming these trials, and if I missed anything or if you watch these and you're just watching my updates and I missed details, I promise I tried so hard, okay? If you're just watching me just cuz you love me and you don't know anything about this trial, but now I've got you interested and you want like all the goodies, go over there to, any of those 2 places. Court TV itself is of course airing the trial. If you love the content, Gizella K is the queen of true crime on this space, in my opinion. You can go to any of those places and get any of the details that you feel like I'm missing or you're missing, or if you just want all of that saturated, like courtroom, like if you want all 8 hours of it. Okay. I don't have that because I wish I could, but I can't. But here's what I got. Okay. In my scribbles and in my notes. It's probably imperfect, but here it is. Okay. All right. So Tuesday morning. You guys want to know something so fun about making videos for YouTube? Let me tell you. I just recorded about 17 minutes with my mic like this. That's because I happened to touch my microphone in exactly the right spot. And for about 16 minutes, I was just ranting while nothing was being recorded. Oh my God, it's so fun. That part's so fun. It's so fun. Okay. All right. So let's get back into it. Tuesday morning, like I said, Tuesday morning, we get opening statements from both sides of the court. And remember, opening statements are not evidence, right? They're just kind of each side's roadmap to what they want the jury to believe the evidence is going to show once they get into presenting. It's basically like the trailer. Okay, it's not the movie. We don't marry the trailer. We wait for the movie to come out before we. Okay. All right. So, the prosecution in this case is represented by Jenna Sands. She laid out prosecution's theory for about 15 minutes. She was very methodical. She was very detailed. She told the jury about this elaborate murder plot that apparently, allegedly, spanned like months before it actually occurred. And here is what Jenna Sands said the evidence would show. Brendan and Juliana created a fake profile on the FetLife fetish website using Christine Banfield's name and photograph. They called the account Anastasia 9. And they were apparently very careful about when they posted to this site. They made sure that they used only Christine's laptop and phone when she was like home from work. Because, and we'll get to this in our star witness testimony, but this was because they knew that when and if there was an investigation into Christine's death, right? This goes to the planning. Police would check where those devices were pinging from while these messages to this site were being sent. Now, they apparently, allegedly, communicated with multiple men from this site, but they were looking for someone very specific, right? They were looking for someone who would agree to come to the house, right? Not someone who would meet in public, not someone who wanted to meet at a hotel, but someone who was willing to come to the home. And they found this man, Joseph Ryan. According to the prosecution, they convinced Joseph Ryan that Christine wanted to act out what they called a stranger rape fantasy. And Sands told the jury, quote, Brendan created the narrative that Christine desperately wanted to be raped. Posing as Christine, he told Joe what to do. Come to the home and rest in. The door will be unlocked. Christine will be asleep in bed. Come straight upstairs, cut off her clothing, tie her, rape her. Simple and fun. I hate it. I hate it so much. It's nightmare fuel for me. Okay. So the prosecution's theory is that they lured Joseph Ryan there. Brendan came into the home, shot him when he arrived. He used the knife that Joseph Ryan had brought with him to stab Christine to death. And then Juliana shot Joseph Ryan again because he was still moving. Sands promised the jury that they would hear from Juliana herself, which they do, and that the digital and blood evidence would back up her testimony, what she had to say. Now, I think defense went on for about 15 minutes as well. And Brendan Banfield's defense attorney's name is John Carroll, and he took a completely different approach. He spent most of his time attacking Juliana's credibility, right? He pointed out that she was offered multiple plea deals by the prosecution and that she had turned them all down before finally accepting one. And his whole defense, as far as Juliana is concerned, is basically saying, like, look, she's got every single reason to lie and to save herself here. What's interesting, of course, is that he did concede to the affair that Brendan and Juliana were having. He's not denying that, but what he is denying is the murder plot. And then Mr. Carroll dropped his defense theory. He says that it was Joseph Ryan who killed Christine, not Brendan, okay? He's arguing that Brendan shot Ryan in self-defense or in defense of his wife, basically. He also said and is saying that investigators and detectives manipulated evidence and built their entire case around this cooperating witness who has every incentive to lie, aka Juliana. So, right out of the gate, we've got two different narratives. The prosecution is saying this is an elaborate murder plot, and then we have the defense who says that Joseph Ryan is the real killer and that Juliana is only saying these things to save herself. And as Tiff Unraveled jurors, right, we've got our jury brains today. We need to keep both of these theories in mind as we start to hear all of the evidence. So let's get into that. So after opening statements, prosecution moved through their first few witnesses pretty quickly. First up was the Fairfax County custodian of records. She confirmed like the 911 calls that morning, how they're stored, how they're maintained, all that kind of stuff. She testified that the first call that was received was a hang-up received from Juliana's phone. And then the 911 center called back but there was no answer. They left a voicemail. And then about 15 minutes later, there was another call from Juliana. 3 calls is going to make me lean forward because, like, why are we doing a trilogy right now? Like, why are there 3 911 calls? But we get to that. We get to that. In that 3rd call, Juliana, you could hear her. She sounded like she was struggling to breathe. She was struggling to speak. And Brendan, of course, he had to take over and answer the operator's questions. On that call, you can hear Brendan. Almost the first thing he said was something along the lines of, like, I'm a federal agent. Like, it was weird to me, and maybe that's not weird. Maybe when federal agents make 911 calls, it's the first thing they say. I don't know. I'm not a federal agent. I've never made a phone call as one. So I don't know what they say when they make them. But it just seemed weird. Seemed strange to me, right? Anyway, on that call, you hear Brendan saying that he had shot this man who was intruding on their home and that the man had stabbed his wife in the neck. So that was 911 calls. They were interesting to me. If you guys listen to them, if you want to go listen to them in the live court footage, please do. And I would love to hear what you guys have to say about the 911 calls. So anyway, then there were 3 police officers, I think, that testified. They were showing some body camera footage. None of the actual footage was available to the gallery. We only had audio. But video footage was available to, obviously, attorneys, judge, witness, and jurors. But we could hear all the things that were going on. And I will tell you, in all of the body cam footage, I mean, it was total chaos at the scene when first responders arrived. It was crazy. But first responders or responding officers described finding Christine in the upstairs bedrooms with stab wounds to her neck, upper body, and stating that Joseph Ryan was nearby with gunshots to his upper body. They were kind of trying to figure out, like, they I think they knew that Christine was still alive. Like, she, as far as what I could hear, at that time at the house, she still had a pulse, maybe a faint pulse. They were talking about the chest seals. Really, they were really working on Christine. I think I do remember hearing on some of the body cam footage, one of the responding officers saying that Joseph Ryan had no pulse. And so I think that their focus was on Christine at this time. And she was actually transferred to the hospital where she was later pronounced dead. But Joseph Ryan, I think, was pronounced dead there at the scene. So here's where defense starts to kind of poke at things, right? In their cross-examination of these responding officers, they ask the responding officers about Brendan's emotional state. And the officers obviously do confirm that Brendan appeared to be, upset. One of them stated that he thought he seemed like he was in a state of panic, maybe like a panic attack. And that when he was at the hospital and was told that his wife had died, it was very emotional and was crying and was like, crying and wiping his face. And this is where testimony came in that is really significant and really crucial. The defense focused on the fact that there were very chaotic first moments after first responders arrived, right? They were talking about how many officers were inside the house, how this scene was being processed. And they brought up something very critical. One of the officers, one of the Fairfax County officers that was at the hospital with Brendan Banfield, allowed him to wash the blood off of his hands after he had been informed that his wife, Christine, did not make it. So let that sink in for just a second. Hands, crime scene, okay? Hands covered in blood, allowed to wash them at the hospital before any DNA samples were taken. If you work in healthcare, you probably just felt your eye twitch because same. I understand infection control. Okay, I get that. But the evidence people are somewhere at this point, like screaming into the void. He washed his hands before there were any DNA swabs taken of all of this evidence on his hands. Now, in trauma situations, there are protocols, right? But this is a potential crime scene and this is a potential suspect. And I know that maybe at the time they weren't thinking of him in that way, but I feel like evidence preservation, right? Wherever there is blood or wherever there is evidence, right? Even if that's not, I don't know. It just seemed fact that he was allowed to wash his hands before any evidence was collected from him, um, it's gonna be a problem for prosecution's forensic evidence, and I guarantee we'll see that play out next week. It has to be brought up again. Then we have the medical examiner, right? This is the woman who conducted the autopsies on both the victims. For Joseph Ryan, the cause of death was multiple gunshot wounds to the upper body. The manner of death was homicide, and he was shot in the head, they believe initially, and then shot again in the chest. For Christine Banfield, the cause of death was stab wounds to the upper body, and the manner of death was homicide. And again, there were multiple stab wounds, particularly to the neck area. The medical examiner's testimony was pretty straightforward. They were homicides. Both victims died from their injuries. No surprises there, right? It's one of those moments where the courtroom gets very quiet because we stop talking about theories and we start talking about what actually caused the deaths of these two human beings. She also talked about some bruises that were on Christine's body. They ranged from being like on the arms, the inner arms, the thighs, the knees, the inner thighs, the calves, right? She didn't say that she could conclusively say when Christine received these bruises, but she did say that they were new bruises, like based on the coloring. They weren't like old healing bruises. They were new bruises. Now, did that happen when Joseph Ryan came in and was playing out the fantasy, or did that happen from Brendan Banfield holding down his wife when she was probably fighting for it? That's going to be, I don't know if it'll be talked about again, but it'll be up for the jury to decide. And then late Tuesday afternoon, we have our star witness, right? Juliana Magalhaes. This is her. This is the au pair. She was on the stand for a couple hours on Tuesday, with direct from the state. Her testimony was detailed, it was graphic, and it was quite damning for Brendan Banfield, if you believe what she's saying. And this is where I think the energy in the room probably would have started to change. Like the jury's recalibrating at this point, right? Like this is who everyone is waiting to hear from. Juliana started by talking a little bit about her background. She came to the United States in October of 2021. She was 21 years old and she came to work as an au pair at the Banfield family's home. She said that initially her relationship with the family was professional. She said that she felt welcomed and that she actually felt closer with Christine and the child than she did with Brendan. But then in August of 2022, that is when she said that her relationship with Brendan Banfield turned sexual. She had told some of her friends and family, I believe, about the affair. She was open about the relationship on social media. The prosecution showed the jury some of the social media posts that Juliana had made, right? It was pictures of her and Brendan together. But she did cover his face in most of these photos. And she said that it was around October of 2022 when Brennan started talking about like wanting to marry her, and have children with her, and really started to talk to her about a future together. And that is when he allegedly first mentioned his plans to get rid of his wife. She said that Brendan told her that divorce was not an option because of money and because he didn't want to share custody of their daughter. Juliana testified, I think, that at first she just kind of thought he was joking. I never understand when people say this because to me it's like, kill your wife. God, you're hilarious. You know what I mean? okay. But then things started like happening, right? That were like moving towards this plan being played out. So that same month, October of 2022, Brennan started taking Juliana to a shooting range. He taught her how to shoot. They went back again to that shooting range, I think in December of that year. And then in January, Brennan purchased a new firearm. This was less than a month before this incident took place. He later gave that gun to Juliana after he purchased it. Juliana testified that it was around January of 2023 that she and Brendan created an email address using Christine's name. And then they used Christine's laptop, which she kept in her backpack. And and Juliana said that every day when she came home from work, she would leave her backpack by the front door with her laptop in it and just kind of leave it there and go upstairs to the room. And when she would do that, they would access her laptop and or her cell phone while she was asleep or in another room to get onto this FetLife website and curate these relationships with what they hope to be their 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 scapegoat, their guy, right? To come to the house and play this whole thing out. So Juliana testified they were very strategic about when they used these devices. She said they only used Christine's laptop and phone when she was at home. And why was that? Well, Juliana said it was because Brendan told her that when there's a criminal investigation, and he knew there would be one because this was going to be a murder, right? Via Joseph Ryan, according to their plan, police would check Christine's phone and her laptop and where they were pinging when these messages to these men were sent, right? So if they wanted it to look like it was actually Christine who was doing this, they would have to do it when Christine was at home, right? So that she would be the one sending these messages, according to investigators. I mean, honestly, think about that level of planning. That is not a crime of passion. That is at its core and by very definition premeditation, if that's true. So they're on FetLife. They're looking for men. They are looking for what Juliana called aggressive sexual preferences. They communicated with a lot of FetLife users, but they had a very specific criteria. They immediately stopped talking to anyone who wanted to meet in public, meet at a hotel, or meet at their home. Anyone who said that they preferred to do those things, they cut communication off with immediately. That's not who they wanted to be talking to. Eventually, they connected with this man. His name was Joseph Ryan. His username was Taco Supreme 7000, and Joseph Ryan agreed to come to the house for a sexual fantasy involving knives and ropes. And when Joseph Ryan agreed to those things, that made Brendan comfortable with luring him. Like in his eyes, that was the guy, right? According to Juliana. So once they established this relationship as Christine with Joseph Ryan, they moved to Telegram for like more direct communication. Juliana testified that Brendan was the one who created the Telegram account on Christine's laptop and that this is what they would use when they had access to her devices. Again, she testified that she would be the one to speak with Joseph Ryan on the phone because obviously he thought that he was speaking to Christine. He needed to hear a female's voice. And that the first time she spoke with him, he sounded surprised by her Brazilian accent. Like he actually mentioned, it was like, oh, you have an accent. The prosecution showed the jury messages between Joseph Ryan and the allegedly fake, Christine Banfield account. In one of those messages, Joseph Ryan said that he was looking forward to meeting her. And in another one of those messages, Joseph Ryan sent a picture of the supplies that he was planning to bring. And you can see like ropes and things like that in that photo. There was also a message from Brendan and Juliana. Well, from Christine, but allegedly, according to the prosecution, from Brendan and Juliana, telling Joseph Ryan that a family dog would be present when he arrived to play out this fantasy, but that the dog would be in the basement and to just leave it alone when he got there. 2 days before the murders, so February 22nd, 2023, Brendan told Juliana, according to Juliana, to get a new cell phone and make like a whole new Apple ID. And why did he tell her to do this? Well, according to her, it was so that there would be no evidence of the pictures of the two of them, which she had on her old phone. And apparently Brendan changed his phone out as well. But preparations apparently had been going on for a lot longer than that. Juliana testified that Brendan changed the windows in the entire house. She said that he needed to make sure that the windows were soundproof so that no one would hear Christine screaming in the bedroom. And that they even tested this theory by screaming in the bedroom, that Brendan would stand in the bedroom and scream to see if Juliana could hear him from outside. She said that he would check to see which of his neighbors had Ring cameras. He said that, or Juliana said that she normally parked in the driveway, but Brendan had told her to start parking in the cul-de-sac instead because if Ryan, this is crazy planning. If this is true, what Juliana said, I mean, this is an insane amount of planning. He was apparently telling Juliana, like, hey, this guy might come case the joint a day or two before just to make sure, like, he's come, right? So your car can't be in the driveway because he might get suspicious if there's too many vehicles in the driveway. So park in the cul-de-sac, like stuff like that. Like, and Juliana is saying that he is telling her, like, I'm doing all of this because I know how this investigation's going to go. Like, I'm thinking ahead. We're taking all these steps preemptively to make sure that nothing can come back to us, basically. I mean, this is detailed planning and premeditation. Brendan started going to McDonald's. Like, he started leaving for work a couple days earlier before the murders took place and started going to, like, have breakfast before work to create a pattern because his plan for the day was to wait at a nearby McDonald's until he was told by Juliana that Joseph Ryan had arrived. I'm confusing myself just talking about it. I hope you guys are staying with me because it's crazy. It's insane the amount of planning that went into this, allegedly, if what Juliana is telling us is true. And notice how the theme is control, right? Sound, cameras, parking, patterns, devices, control, control, control. Okay? Control. Okay. Juliana's testimony about the actual morning of the murders was also incredibly detailed and very graphic. She said that that morning, Brendan had Christine's cell phone. He had taken Christine's cell phone and used it to disable the automatic locks in the house. He then texted Joseph Ryan from her phone telling him, park in the driveway, walk in. And then he turned off Christine's cell phone, all according to Juliana, remember, and hid her phone in a kitchen drawer. And he did that because the plan was that Juliana and Brendan would both go on to call Christine's turned off cell phone when Ryan arrived to make it look like they were trying to alert her that this man had parked. I don't know. And then Juliana would call Brendan to say that someone strange was going into the house. And then Brendan would call Christine to establish that record of trying to alert her. You get it? I don't know. I have the flu. I get a pass. If I make no sense, I get a pass. That's also how I felt while I was watching this. I was like, wait, what? Okay. Anyway, so, all right. So clock that, okay? Because the plan isn't just violence. It's a literal paper trail. Like, they are planning every single aspect of this to make it look like their movements and calls were innocent. Allegedly. So Juliana actually never, according to her, never even left that morning. She just stayed because remember, she had been parking in the cul-de-sac in case in case of Joseph Ryan, like, playing detective before he showed up for this fantasy role play thing, right? So she stayed where she was and she watched for Joseph Ryan when he showed up. This is according to Juliana. I'm going to keep saying that until it's not that anymore. According to Juliana, when Joseph Ryan showed up to the Banfield home, she called Brendan. Brendan arrived. They entered the house through the basement with the 4-year-old daughter in tow, by the way, in case anyone forgot. And they left the child in the basement with an iPad while they went upstairs to do this craziness. So they quietly move upstairs. Juliana said that Brendan made a hand gesture for her to be quiet and wait. They heard a slapping sound, she says, from the bedroom upstairs. And then Juliana described what happens next. And again, remember, this is her testimony. This is what she is saying happened. I'm going to keep repeating that because it matters. Testimony is just a piece of the puzzle. It's not the whole thing, okay? So, according to Juliana, they enter the bedroom. They see Joseph Ryan on top of Christine. Brendan yelled that he was a police officer. And then, and I'm quoting Juliana here, kind of, I think. Christine's first reaction, it was the first time I heard her say anything at that point. And she yelled back at Brendan saying, "Brendan, he has a knife." And that's when Brendan first shot Joe. That's what Juliana says. Brendan shot Joseph Ryan in the head with his IRS service weapon. Christine told Juliana to call 911, and that's when Juliana called. But she said she hung up immediately when Brendan gave her a hand gesture that looked like hanging up the phone. She says that when she looked at Brendan, like she had dialed 911. Remember, we got that first hang up. She had dialed 911. She said while she was on the phone, she looked at Brendan and Brendan was like she made that gesture in court, like, hang it up, right? That's what she says Brendan told her to do. So she hung it up. That's when we got that call back from 911 that wasn't answered. Okay. So Juliana then says that Brendan told her to go get a towel from the bathroom. When she handed him the towel, she said that Brendan got on top of Christine, and that is when he started stabbing her. The prosecution asked where Brendan was stabbing his wife, and Juliana said simply her neck. That word hit me like a ton of bricks because it's just, I don't know, it's so violent. Juliana testified that that is when she saw Joseph Ryan was still moving. So she shot him in the chest with the gun that Brendan had already given her that morning. She had that gun on her. She said that Brendan was still stabbing Christine when she fired that second shot. After the second shot, Juliana said Brendan moved Joseph Ryan's body to get Christine's blood on Joseph Ryan's body. Like, presumably, right? If this man had killed Christine, her blood would be on his body. And so they manipulated Joseph Ryan's body to get Christine's blood on him. Yeah. I don't know. It's that's where court ended, somewhere in there around 5 p.m. on Tuesday. The prosecution was not yet, however, finished with their testimony, and defense had not obviously even begun their cross-examination yet. Long way to go. I look different. This thing happened last night while I was talking. I swear I hit a brick wall. And decided that I needed to just call it a night and wake up and try again this morning. I'm the chauffeur of the struggle bus this morning, but we're going to get through the rest of this. I think where I left off was the end of the first trial day, which was on Tuesday. Prosecution kind of wrapped up during the testimony from Juliana. Wednesday picked up, prosecution resumed their direct of Juliana. And the morning started with them really focusing on the story that she had initially told investigators. And she said, I told them the version that Brendan that we had talked about. I didn't, I told them the story that we had planned and, admitted that that wasn't, the real story. And then they focused on why it took her so long to accept the plea deal and cooperate. And Juliana's answer was really interesting. She said that Brendan's mother, Tess, had been paying for her representation, and Juliana was concerned that if she flipped on Brendan, she would lose her legal representation. She was also afraid that Tess would stop putting money on her account so that she could communicate with her family back in Brazil. So ultimately, she was stating that she was frightened that if she told what really had happened, she would lose her representation and she would lose the financial support that she was receiving from Brendan's family at this time. Understandable, I guess. You're a 20 something year old girl. You're outside, you're away, from your family, you're in a whole other country, feeling isolated and alone. You're scared of the situation that you may have gotten yourself into, allegedly. So I can see her sticking by her story, for those reasons. Anyway, so then it was defense's turn, basically. So John Carroll, Brendan's attorney, he had Juliana on the stand for like 5 hours of this court day. I mean, it was all Juliana all day under cross-examination. And, this is what cross is supposed to do, right? It's not being mean, but it's stress testing the story. That's, making sure that facts line up and, there's a lot of pressure there. And there was pressure. John Carroll repeatedly pushed Juliana for details about the plot. Where were you in the house when you first used Christine's laptop to set up the email? What day was that on? What were you wearing? And Juliana couldn't remember a lot of those details. She said, I can't recall. I don't know where I was or where, I don't remember. She said that all of these things had been blocked out, I guess, because of the trauma and the stress. Trauma can absolutely scramble memories, I'm sure. Also, jurors still have to decide what they believe. Both of those things can be true, I suppose. And Carroll jumped on that. He was like, so you're telling me that your brain has blocked out all of the details of this plan that essentially your whole future, rests on with the Commonwealth of Virginia. It did get pretty tense at one point. Carroll pointed out that Juliana didn't accept the plea deal or tell police that Brendan killed Christine and Ryan until after she started seeing all of the evidence that prosecution had collected for her own trial, which was set to begin, I think, like the following month or something. Also, guys, if some of this stuff is out of order or some of the details are off, again, I was just kind of scribbling and pages got mixed up and all of that. So I just bear with me there, but Carroll's implication was clear regardless. He's saying to her basically like, your testimony is based on what you saw in discovery and not what actually happened. Juliana was trying to cover her own ass, essentially. But yeah. John Carroll then goes through a lot of jailhouse letters from Juliana. He actually had her read aloud excerpts from like dozens of letters that she had sent from jail to like Brendan, his mother. And those letters tell a couple different states of mind for Juliana. The first letters were her saying like, "We will never say that he did these things that he didn't do, and I will stand by my man, and I will take the blame for both of us if I have to. Like, I would never do anything to hurt you. I would never, kind of that kind of vibe." That's what it was in the beginning. And then as the letters progress, you start to kind of see a shift in Juliana's state of mind. She starts to say things like, "I don't want to live like this. I just don't want to feel this way anymore. It's torture. I love you more than anything." And throughout the month of November 2023, her letters just kind of started getting darker and darker. She would say, "I'd rather die than live like this. I cannot bear living. I feel drained, no strength anymore, no courage, no hope. It feels like a personal hell in life, painful, torture, disturbing." Her mind had really gone to a very dark place. And then in One letter she wrote from prison, "I'm not willing to spend my life in prison for something that I didn't do." So, it's like, which is it? Are we gonna take the blame for the both of you? Or now we're like, we're not willing to go to prison for something we didn't do. So there's a shift. I'm only saying that because you can very clearly see a shift in her frame of mind. And so defense is saying, like, this is why you are making this up. This is why you're saying these things, because you couldn't take being in jail anymore, and you couldn't, you were becoming depressed, and so it's like you wanted to get out of there. You didn't want to be there, and you said what you had to say, which is what you're saying today on the stand, so that you could get your deal and get out of here. Juliana testified that at some point she sought help while she was incarcerated. She started taking antidepressants. She said that the medication made her feel numb, so that those feelings would just kind of go away. John Carroll then started digging into the financial arrangements. It does get a little messy here. Like I mentioned, Juliana confirmed that Tessa Banfield was paying for her attorney, and paying for her to be able to communicate with her family, right up until Juliana accepted the plea deal in October 2024. Juliana said that her attorney wasn't working well for her. Her original trial date was in July of 2024, but the attorney continued the case without telling her. And so the trial was reset for November of 2024. And in messages to friends and family, Juliana wrote that her attorney repeatedly blew her off. And when he did show up, he would bring his laptop, but his laptop would be dead. He had no battery. And she wrote that she was just starting to become really, really frustrated, to the point, that she didn't really trust her attorney. So September 16th, 2024 is when Brendan Banfield was arrested. Within 1 month of his arrest, Juliana accepts the plea deal. October 24th is when she gave her interview to police outlining Brendan's alleged role in all of this. October 26th is when Juliana's mother messages blaming everything on Brendan and begging Tess Banfield to keep supporting Juliana financially. On October 28th, 2024, I think, is when Juliana signs the plea deal. And October 29th, she pleads guilty to manslaughter. After the plea deal, Tess completely stopped communicating with Juliana. She stopped sending money to her. And then her support system kind of changed, right? Then she starts to say that after that happened, media producers that were working on documentaries about this case started stepping in. There were 2 producers who allegedly started sending her money for phone calls and for commissary. And then John Carroll brought something up that I think a lot of people are going to have some pretty strong feelings about. In a letter to a friend that was dated on December 13th, 2024, Juliana wrote this: "Let's work together to achieve more things. After a while, when I'm back home, I'll a producer and write a book with my story, even a movie. Make money, right?" She apparently was negotiating with Netflix about selling her story, and she wrote, "My whole life will be exposed to everyone, and they're going to be making a lot of money off of it. We deserve something." This is like one of those moments where half of the internet yells grifter and the other half says survival, and the jury just kind of has to sit back and form their own opinions about this. John Carroll obviously confronts her about this, right? And he says, "You were charged with murder because you shot someone. Am I wrong?" And Juliana says, "I did." And John Carroll says, "And you deserve something because of that." And Juliana clarified by stating that she intended to use the money that she made from any deals to support her family in Brazil. And she said, "My whole point was about helping them because I can't. That was when I was working before. And if they can have someone to help them, I want them to have it." So again, it was almost 5 hours of cross-examination. And then a prosecution got their chance at redirect. And during this redirect, Juliana explained that she accepted the plea deal because she said, "I just couldn't keep it to myself. I had a lot of feelings of shame. There was a lot of guilt. There was a lot of sadness, all of those feelings." And she said that she felt like it was just the right thing to do. And court adjourned after her redirect. So, as Tiff Unraveled jurors, what do we make of Juliana's testimony? If you guys watched any of it, also a lot had been said about her very flat affect throughout her testimony. I did notice her get a little choked up in the beginning, but she was very flat throughout all of her testimony. I know she mentioned being on the medications, which kind of numbed her. I don't know if she's still taking, medications to manage her depression or, her trauma. I'm not sure. But at the end of the day, I mean, we have to remember that this is also someone who is allegedly a part of this entire thing. And if her role in this, even the role that she's admitting to, it's hard to have a whole lot of I'm going off base here. It's hard for me to have a whole lot of sympathy for someone who is involved in such an intricate plot to take the life of another human being and involve a person who has absolutely nothing to do with this and take the life of that person as well. And I know there's also a lot of talk about the fact that she was very young. She was away from her country, away from her family, her friends, and that Brendan may have exerted a lot of like coercive control on her. And that that might play a role. And psychologically, I'm no expert. Sure, I can buy into that for sure, but at the end of the day, you made these decisions. You did this thing with this man. And I know there's a lot of people upset that even that her plea deal was so lenient, because even the role that she's admitted to is, I don't know. What do you guys think? Tell me what you guys think. I'm sure you guys have a lot of strong opinions about this one. Anyway, I mean, as far as her testimony, on one hand, she gave some pretty incredibly detailed testimony about the plot of the murders. And then on the other hand, we have her jailhouse letters that do show that she was very deeply conflicted. She was professing her love for Brendan and offering to take the blame. And then she was, negotiating plea deals and making media deals. So, there was quite obviously a shift. For her somewhere. The defense is arguing very clearly that she's an unreliable witness, that she has every reason to lie. And then the prosecution is arguing that her testimony is corroborated by evidence. She's not just making up some story and we're just going with that. Like, the evidence lines up with what she's saying. Can both things be true? Can she be, can her credibility be, under fire, under question? Can she have, tried to profit off of her involvement, but still be telling the truth about what happened? I would say yes. I would say yes, but I don't know. There's still a long way to go, right? We will have to wait and see what the other evidence shows, and we can get into that now if you want. So last trial day of last week was on Thursday. There was no trial on Friday. There will be no trial on Monday, also just as a, for future reference because it's a holiday. So Thursday was all about like the investigators and the crime scene itself, and it's where we start to be presented with the physical evidence that prosecution is saying lines up with Juliana's testimony. I think the first witness on the stand was Detective Kenner Fortner. He took the photographs at the crime scene. So on the day that it happened, right, he photographed the vehicles at the home. The drawer in the kitchen where Christine's phone was found turned off, just like Juliana said it had been. The bedroom where the murders occurred and the guest bedroom where Juliana was living documented like her clothes in the closet, including some lingerie. Okay. But then Fortner had come back to the home 8 months later to execute another warrant and take more photos. And prosecution is, saying that what he found when he returned is pretty telling. In the primary bedroom where Brennan had slept, Juliana's clothes were now in the shared closet. The framed photographs that had once been of Brendan and Christine had been replaced with photos of Brendan and Juliana. There was a new framed photo of Brendan and Juliana on the bedside table. Um, you know, and then the carpet that was in the room had been replaced with new wood flooring, new furniture had been installed. It wasn't a very subtle move-in. That's something. But next up was Detective Terry Leach. He was the lead crime scene investigator, and he walked the jury through, a bunch of photographic evidence. Again, some of the photos were so graphic that they were only shown to jurors, the judge, the lawyers, and the witness himself. The gallery did not see those images, but we did see crime scene photos showing bloodstains on carpet, on clothes, and the gun and the knife that were used. So Detective Leach described where the victims had been found. Joseph Ryan was found with both of his legs underneath the bed. His head was resting on like a dog bed, and some pajama bottoms. Near his head was a pair of black underwear that had been ripped at the crotch. Christine Banfield was found on the other side of the bed. There were 2 large blood pools on the ground. Investigators found a black t-shirt that had been completely cut, in like a jagged line through the center. And it was close to a pile of blankets and the towel that were next to the bed. Detective Leach did testify that the knife had been like stepped on or kind of kicked around or moved around by police and fire department personnel during the time that all of that chaos was erupting in the body cam footage from the first day of trial, right? Everybody was rushing around because again, at that time, it was heard that Christine still had like a pulse. They were trying to save her life. And so things kind of got moved around in that process, basically. So the crime scene was contaminated to some extent by the first responders who were trying to save lives. But I guess well, not I guess, it does become important, when you start talking about forensic evidence. It's where defense attorneys, start rubbing their hands together like little cartoon villains because doubt. Okay. Then Detective Leach showed the jury video surveillance and call logs that corroborated Juliana's testimony about the plan. So remember, Juliana said that Brendan was supposed to wait at a nearby McDonald's until she called to let him know, basically, hey, he's here. It's go time. They played the McDonald's surveillance video, which did show Brendan ordering food through the drive-thru, parking his car, and then walking inside the restaurant, entering the bathroom. And then at 7:37 a.m., he exits the bathroom with his phone to his ear, gets in his car, and drives away. And the call logs show that Juliana called Brendan at exactly that time that he was walking out of the McDonald's bathroom. They also show that Brendan and Juliana made outgoing calls to Christina's cell phone, which was turned off and hidden in the kitchen drawer, according to her testimony. And again, photos show the phone was in that kitchen drawer, as Juliana had said. And Juliana said that they made these calls to make it look like they were trying to alert Christine. Well, we saw the call logs. Those calls were made. So in this instant, the digital evidence and the surveillance video do match what Juliana testified to as far as the plan that morning. And I did find that significant. But that's just me, It's timestamps. It's stuff we can see. It's stuff we can link to what she is saying. And that's important, especially when you have a witness who is probably looked at as not so credible, right? So the story itself's not going to fly. You've got to show us, the evidence that goes along with the story that you want us to believe, right? So we also had a fingerprint examiner. He testified about the prints that were lifted from the knife that killed Christine. And the fingerprints that were found on the knife were found to be inconclusive matches to both Brendan and Joseph Ryan. That sucks. The prints definitely did not match Christine or Juliana's. That's conclusively ruled out. But inconclusive is important. It doesn't mean that the prints didn't belong to Brendan Banfield or to Joseph Ryan. It just means the prints could have belonged to either one of them, but they're not definitive enough to make a positive conclusive identification. So the fingerprint evidence doesn't prove definitively that Brendan held that knife, but it also doesn't rule him out. Juliana testified that Joseph Ryan had brought that knife with him, right? And we saw the telegram messages where Ryan sent the picture to Christine with pictures of what he was going to be bringing, which included the knife and the ropes. So Joseph Ryan, I'm like his prints, if they found his prints on that knife, that wouldn't be surprising to me. He brought it with him to this scene to play out this role play fantasy. So his prints being on that knife wouldn't prove to me that he used it in the act anyway, because of course his prints are on it. It was his knife anyway. That's just my thoughts. But anyway, the question is, did Brendan also handle that knife? And unfortunately, fingerprints can't tell us that in this case. Yeah. Also, when experts are testifying, well, not when inconclusive in my brain, I already set myself up for like when I hear the words inconclusive, it's basically my brain translate that into courtroom talk for congratulations. Now we all get to listen to everyone argue about what that means for about 45 minutes. So, yeah. And, a lot of people find these court days like kind of boring when investigators, like crime scene investigators, are talking about blood and photos and spatter and that kind of stuff. I don't find it boring. I find it really interesting. But I do know that you can start to lose the jury when some of these conversations go on and get really technical and really scientific for too long. I do obviously think it's significant because, again, we have our star witness and we need to see the evidence that lines up with what she told us happened, right? In order for us to believe that what she's saying is true. Anyway, next up, I think we had a forensic scientist named Catherine Colombo, cool name, Catherine, who testified about the DNA evidence. And this is where that hand washing incident that we talked about from day one of the trial really becomes important. Okay, so here's what the DNA evidence did show. Brendan Banfield's DNA was also not found on the knife that killed Christine. Oh, I can't remember if they showed these genes with Catherine or if they should. No, it was the guy who was talking about the photos that was presenting all the evidence, right? The crime scene evidence. Brendan Banfield's jeans. This one I found interesting. So the jeans that he was wearing, right? They're covered in blood. Okay. And you would think, okay, there's blood on his jeans. He was at the scene. He was trying to save his wife, or he was, where his wife was, right? Where Christine was. And so most of those stains were kind of those big, like soaked in, like maybe he had knelt next to her or got, just gotten smudges of blood and stuff on him. But there was this one part on his jeans that they highlighted that was like, like splatter, right? I think they called them droplets, spatter. I'm not sure. But, and it called into question was like, well, okay, but this is like spatter. How did that get there? If you weren't in the immediate vicinity when Christine was being stabbed, right? Because these droplets could have been like from, the motion of the knife being, hate that talking about it like that, but like, the forward and backward direction of the knife, right? You're gonna get those little splatters. I guess some people could argue that like if he was like holding her or something, maybe it could have like dropped down. I don't know, but I found that pretty interesting. That blood, Catherine Colombo testified that blood splatter on Brendan's jeans matched Christine's blood. So that was Christine's blood in that droplet or splatter pattern on his pants. Here's a big shocker. No DNA evidence was found on Brendan Banfield's hands. Shocker. But, and this is critical, Colombo testified and reiterated, obviously, because Brendan was allowed to wash his hands at the hospital before any DNA samples could be taken. And she very clearly said that, yes, washing his hands definitely could have wiped away or cleaned away any DNA that had been there. So we have no DNA evidence linking Brendan to the knife, and we have no DNA on his hands. So it sucks. They shouldn't have done that, obviously. And because he washed, we'll never know what was there. And it just feels so avoidable. But anyway, I digress. As far as defense is concerned, the lack of DNA evidence means that Brendan didn't stab Christine. It's just not really compelling at this point because we don't know what was on his hands. We don't know. We don't know. We don't know what was there. Like, yeah, maybe DNA evidence wasn't present on his hands because he didn't kill Christine. Or maybe DNA evidence wasn't on his hands because he was allowed to freaking wash them. So it's just not compelling. It's not a compelling argument. Like, oh, there was no DNA on his hands. He didn't do it. Well, we don't know what was on his hands. It went down the sink drain at the hospital. It's frustrating. Anyway, Colombo also testified that there was no evidence of any kind of sexual assault. That's consistent with the prosecution's theory that Joseph Ryan never actually assaulted Christine because Brendan had come in and shot him before any of that ever happened. There were talks about like the gun purchase that was established through a witness showing that Brendan had bought a gun in January, less than a month before the murders, and that gun was like that morning given to Juliana. Gun range evidence. So we saw the photos that Brendan took of Juliana at the gun range twice in the weeks before the murders, and there were visitor logs that confirmed their attendance at the range. Prosecutors, of course, were alleging that the soundproof windows, we heard from the guy who installed them, saying that Brendan paid more than like $30,000 to install these triple pane windows in the house to muffle loud noises like gunshots. And again, I guess they were trying to corroborate the fact that Juliana had testified that he started soundproofing before this happened, and that they even tested the soundproofing by screaming inside the house to see if it could be heard from the outside. Again, all of this evidence, most of this evidence, right, really does, in my opinion, right now, go to show some planning and premeditation. That's just my opinion right now, because things are kind of lining up to show there was planning here. But, again, still a long way to go. And that kind of wraps up week 1 of the Brendan Banfield trials, Commonwealth of Virginia versus Brendan Banfield. Yeah. So here's what prosecution has shown us so far, or shown me. Everybody takes different things out of these trials, which is why I love talking about them so much with you guys. But so far, they're arguing motive, meaning Brendan was having an affair with Juliana. He lived in au pair, wanted to get rid of his wife without having to go through the cost of a divorce, without having to interrupt custody of his daughter. And then, of course, they're arguing planning, right? With extensive evidence, in my opinion, of the premeditation, like the creation of the FetLife account, the gun purchase, the gun range training, the soundproofing of the home, the new phones, new Apple ID, the very strategic timing of when they used Christine's devices. They're pointing to the timeline corroboration of that morning where the McDonald's surveillance video matches the call logs, and it all matches Juliana's testimony about the plan. They're showing the physical evidence, like Christine's blood on Brendan's jeans in that one specific pattern, the crime scene photos, the weapons. They're highlighting the aftermath behavior, right? Including Juliana's move into the master bedroom within, and we don't know how soon it happened. We just know that investigator showed up 8 months after. So within that 8-month period, Juliana was already moved into the master bedroom, replacing Christine's photos with her own. I mean, it's a lot. There is a lot that goes to that. Here's what defense has challenged so far. They've gone hard at Juliana's credibility, right? They're focusing on the jailhouse letters that show her conflicting loyalties, her offer to take the blame for both of us, the fact that she didn't cooperate until after seeing the prosecution's evidence in this case. They're talking about the Netflix deals, the financial motivations to tell this. I guess I think it's made up. That's where I take issue. I'm like, so are we just saying that she just made this whole thing up? Pretty elaborate to just be sitting in your jail cell and just coming up. Like, is that what we're saying, defense? We're saying she made this up? I mean, that's fine if that's what we're going with. It's just that is hard to believe. And, they are going hard at her inability to remember key details. I will say, as far as that's concerned, like when prosecution was questioning Juliana, I mean, she remembered everything. She had although I did also notice like a lot of pauses from her when like tough questions were asked. There was like, I'm sorry, what? Kind of that stalling thing. I did notice that. But as far as details, like she had no problem. I don't think she ever once said, I don't recall. Maybe not once, but she was able to recall all the details that prosecution was asking. When defense started their cross, there was a lot of like, I don't recall. And maybe that's because defense is asking more pointed questions. I don't know. But anyway, that's just my little side thoughts on that. Defense has also obviously highlighted like forensic evidence gaps, Brendan's DNA not being on the murder weapon, no DNA evidence on Brendan's hands, obviously, the fingerprints on the knife being inconclusive, crime scene contamination by first responders, and their alternative theory is that Joseph Ryan killed Christine Banfield and Brendan Banfield walked in during the commission of this act of violence and, saved his wife or tried to save his wife and shot Ryan in defense of her. That's, but it's the story that Juliana is telling as far as defense's stance on that story. Like, we're going back to that. Like, that it's all made up. It's weird if that's true, because that's an awful lot of strange detail for someone to just be making that up. She'd be quite the storyteller if that was the case. Anyway, so yeah, as jurors, right? Can defense explain away all of this planning evidence? Like, how are they going to do that? Now, prosecution has not rested. I don't think that happened. So there's more to see there. But, can you explain away all of the evidence that makes it look like there was planning involved, right? The soundproof windows, the purchase of the second gun, the training, the FetLife account, the catfishing of multiple different men until the right one was found. Is Juliana's testimony credible, right? That's what the jurors are trying to figure out. Is she, just trying to save herself here? I don't really know how this is saving her either. Well, I don't know. Anyway, I don't know. There's just a lot of questions I feel like that the jurors probably have. Again, I'm trying to remain objective here, but after week 1, I have to say the prosecution did present a lot of physical evidence that is corroborating Juliana's testimony. Do I like her? No. Do I think that she deserves this super lenient plea deal in exchange for her testimony? No. That's my opinion right now. I don't like Juliana. I believe what she is saying, only because, again, of the physical evidence that I saw, but also because I feel like it's an incredibly hard story to just come up with. Anyway, it's just, I feel like prosecution tied that physical evidence into her story. And I feel like that's not nothing. Of course, we can't ignore the jailhouse letters, her saying, I'll take the blame for both of us. That's definitely a damaging statement, but she's obviously not doing that. But I guess the fact that she was willing to do that in the beginning, I don't know. I'm confused by Juliana as a human. Anyway, again, motives, as far as Juliana is concerned, do I think that both things can be true? Yes. Do I think that someone can use their story and their involvement as a way to, for financial gain and that kind of stuff, but still be telling the truth about what happened? Yes. Right? Do I think that makes her a shitty person? Yeah. But can it make jurors question her motives? Also, sure. Again, forensic evidence is mixed, right? Lack of DNA, lack of fingerprints. And I mean, it all really just falls down to like one question for me. If Joseph Ryan was the one who killed Christine Banfield, then why did Brendan and Juliana go through all of that elaborate planning? Like, what was all of that about? Unless, again, we're saying she made it up. I don't know. Defense, I feel like, is going to have to address that when they start presenting their case. So we're probably going to see the end of the prosecution's case pretty early on in week 2 next week. And then defense will have their chance to present their case. Will Brendan Banfield testify? Big question, right? Huge decision. If he testifies, he's obviously opening himself up to cross-examination. And if he doesn't, after, his lover got on the stand and said all of those things, if he doesn't get on the stand and refute that stuff, the jury is going to wonder, like, why? Of course, it is his right not to testify. And we all know it can be incredibly damaging for defense's case in so many of these trials. We've seen it happen a million times. Is defense going to present like expert witnesses to counter the prosecution's forensics? Will they present like an alternative timeline completely? Will they call character witnesses for Brendan Banfield? Will we hear anything about the 4-year-old daughter? Like, she was in that house. She was in the basement with her iPad while this entire thing was unfolding. Like, did she hear anything? Did she see anything? Obviously, we're not going to see this little girl like get on the stand. I'm just wondering like if there's any information as far as that is concerned. And then of course we have like this investigator that John Carroll said in his opening statements, was removed from his role in this investigation when he disagreed with this whole theory of this being what happened, and that he was completely taken off of the case for that reason, because they had tunnel vision. They had confirmation bias. And if this guy wasn't agreeing, they didn't want to hear anything about it. I'm still waiting to hear more about that. And I'm sure defense will get into it, right? Again, this case is unfolding right here in my own backyard. We're in Fairfax County, Virginia. It does make me think about how my local criminal justice system handles big cases like these, how, evidence is collected, all of that. But we will follow this case together to the end. I want us to keep thinking like jurors. We're that's our job. We're going to evaluate the evidence. We're going to listen to both sides. We're going to critically think about what we're hearing. We're going to ask our own questions and form our own opinions. And I can't wait to hear about all of those questions and opinions from you guys. Because at the end of the day, there are two people here who lost their lives, right? Christine Banfield and Joseph Ryan. Their lives were taken from them. A 4-year-old girl lost her mother, and as of right now, her father as well. And we owe it to absolutely everyone involved in this case to take it seriously and really think about what justice is going to look like here. So, again, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What do you guys make of Juliana's testimony? What do you think about the way evidence was handled? What do you think about Brendan Banfield being allowed to wash his hands at the hospital? What do we think about that? I want to do a little bit more regular coverage of this case moving into next week, starting Tuesday. I can't say it will be every day, but maybe every other day, because obviously this one ran long because I had a week's worth of trial to talk about. And again, I know it was kind of all over the place. And if you're still here and you're hanging in there, thank you so much. I love you guys so much. But we will keep talking about this until it's done. So I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your Sunday. I'll talk to you guys soon. Until I do, please stay safe. Keep asking questions and keep unraveling. Love you.